Hello, guys. Here we are again, back with our webinar at IPXO. And today we're gonna have a very interesting conversation about BGP leaks, hijacks, and abuse. And we'll also going to kind of check where we are today and can it be fixed the way it is right now. So today with me, I'm gonna have Doug Madori, Director of Internet Analysis at Kentic, Mingbei Zhang, Senior Systems Engineer at Cloudflare and the founder of BGP Kit, and Sebastian Cesario, CTO and co-founder at Before AI. And as always, myself, Vincentas Grinius, the co-founder at IPXO. So, guys, thank you very much for joining today's webinar. It's going to be an awesome discussion. And I would like to kind of start from um, kind of question, how far are we fixing all those issues in today's world? Doug?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. I guess I've been doing analysis along these lines for 15, going on 16 years, and I guess I would say in that time, I would say things have improved in some ways, and then there's still things that remain unsolved. So I would say that the overall state of routing hygiene has improved quite a bit. When I first started, there was quite a few like massive origination leaks that would take place. There's some famous ones that are took place, 10 or more years ago, and were very disruptive. And we don't have that much of that anymore, and that's a good thing. I mean, the last really massively disruptive BGP leak took place. We could debate this, but in many ways, maybe he's got a different opinion. But like the Allegheny Tech, Verizon, Cloudflare, the leak. But that's June 2019, and internet time. That's a a lot of time has passed, and so there's reasons why we don't seem to have that. It's not just RPI ROV, which I think we'll talk about, but there's other just overall the multiple different mechanisms that people have been working on has improved the state of affairs in BGP. Having said that, there's a handful of things that remain unresolved, and those fall into the category of the determined adversary, where someone knows the weaknesses of the mechanisms that we've deployed globally to the internet and can evade them. Like ROV can be fooled. So addressing that is going to take new technologies and a lot of work. But I guess I'm hopeful in that if we were able to deploy ROV globally, that we can get the next thing done. I look at it as a glass half full thing, that there's work to be done. It's going to take a while, but we've been able to deploy something globally, which I think for people who aren't familiar, you've got 80,000 networks in the world. AS, as we're talking about BGP, to deploy something, even if it's incomplete, to a point where it's sufficiently deployed and it's making a difference, is a non-trivial task, and we've done a good job on that. So now we need to take lessons from that, and figure out how do we deploy the next round of tools.
So ROV is kind of a good solution, and of course, the more networks would implement that, the better and the more transparency we will have within our networks and ecosystem. But talking from, let's say, the domain names and DNS, Sebastian, perhaps you can outline the biggest challenges in today's world. What do you see from your perspectives?
I think that the main point that we need to address as the people that care about this topic is collaboration. Because first of all, it's like the first time I have listened about BGP was when I was doing CCNA back in the days, finishing high school. And at the moment, there were no like built-in authentication, validation, etc. And it has grown a lot since then. But the main problem in terms of attacks, and this is something that we're seeing a lot at the domain level, that is mostly our expertise, but because looking backwards, the infrastructure, fingerprints, BGP, and a lot of parts of the network infrastructure are really critical, is that attackers collaborate a lot in terms to commit their crimes, but we are sometimes having a hard time in order to collaborate and sync between entities. So in the end, we are being slower than them. And something that we are seeing at a consistent pace is the speed that the attacks are evolving is sometimes faster than the industry to protect evolves. So more collaboration means higher speed and time to deploy fixes. And this is for me the key in the industry nowadays if we want to become better and faster.
Uh, Mingbe, so talking from you have a huge network, you have a lot of playground. So what would you see from the perspectives? What do you see right now, and what can it be fixed or addressed?
So I'd like to first echo a few points from Doug that the routing security has been improved a lot in the recent years, especially like he mentioned that we have started a lot of like standardizations, like RPKI deployments, ROA for networks to register their prefixes, and then ROV for validations across networks to verify the status of certain routes. And this has been growing a lot, but we're still needing more kind of efforts from the community to get to the stage where the majority of network are safe. So right now, in the past year, we've seen relatively significant growth in terms of like ROV registrations. We're looking at roughly 10% growth in just 2024 alone. That's the data that we got. We observed roughly from 44% to right now like 55% in terms of like ROV registrations. That means over half, roughly half and more of all the routes on the internet are being registered RPKI and can be validated, and that's the first step. So have something that is up there and then able to validate is very important for the community, for the safety of the entire community. The second one is like validation. So I think this is actually being a good stage right now because Doug has mentioned a few times on his posts about like the right now like origin hijacks or those like origin leaks are mostly localized because they will now pass through tier ones these days. The last time I checked, there were like roughly maybe just one or two of all the tier ones are not deploying ROV. So that means anytime a route that passes through tier ones to the upstream to tier one, it will get filtered out, those bad routes. So these are localized events. So the hijacks or the origin hijacks these days are very localized. And then, so from Cloudflare's perspective, we are looking at, so since we have a large number of peers and we're collaborating with many networks, we're actually more localized than most of the networks, I would say. And then these days, I think we are seeing a lot less like problems with origins than with the kind of propagation of misconfigurations, leaks, for example, like that, or kind of policy-wise misconfigurations rather than security-wise things. So these are more of the problems that we're seeing these days rather than like malicious hijacks and stuff like that.
So what I hear is that you guys mentioned a couple of times the community. So what exactly community should participate in to make that internet better? Like, in a simple language, what should we address, within their network perimeter, what we should kind of implement, what type of technologies and all that stuff. Doug.
Sure. So we're talking about the NOG communities. These are basically the engineers that work at either the telecoms that make the internet work, or the internet firms. Either we're looking at content providers, DNS service providers, all the different pieces of the ecosystem that make up the internet community. These are those are the entities we rely on to deploy some of these routing security mechanisms. And when I started looking at this a few years ago, I came to this company I'm at now, Kentic, and so we are known for NetFlow Analytics. We're a cloud-based NetFlow Analytics company, among other things. And so I have this very large corpus of traffic records to look at, that pass through all of the service providers, and content providers, a variety of different types of companies that we have, and we can kind of look at, like, for the traffic that's going through, we have a slice. We have a good slice. It's not, I don't have all knowledge, but I have a representative slice of the internet's traffic at my disposal to look at, how much traffic goes to routes with ROAs, routes without ROAs, that kind of thing. And the insight from a couple of years ago was that, due to content providers, we've got Cloudflare here, other content providers had done RPI/ROV deployments, as well as eyeball networks, we call them, or access networks, residential broadband in the United States. That was Spectrum and Comcast had done big ROV deployments. That between the eyeball networks and the content providers, that represents a very large amount of the traffic, more so than just counting BGP routes would reveal. So the insight was that we were actually much farther along when we looked at, like, bits per second of traffic that's going to routes covered by ROAs, and therefore that traffic would be eligible, as how I would put it, for any protection that the ROV mechanism would provide. But so we've made great strides, because some of the key players, eyeball networks, content providers, and a lot of the DNS operators as well, have done ROV deployments, and that took the technical leadership at those companies to figure out that this is worth doing. I think there's a little bit of shame that we were able to institute within the communities. A lot of evangelism. I give Joe Snyder's a lot of credit for that. He led that charge, going around the world for many years, trying to
Yeah.
articulate that vision, to the point where people started to relent under and then it became, once a couple of companies did it, then it felt like, well, why are you not doing it? Why is your company not doing it? So that, and then we got the ball rolling. And again, back to the original comments, maybe this is a lesson we can use going forward for future technical deployments, because we're going to need more things to keep at this problem. But maintaining momentum is going to be a challenge, I think.
I think that the last 10% will be the hardest one of the adoption of PKI.
Yeah, and maybe you don't get it.
It's always easier to do the 90%, but the 10% is the hardest one.
Yeah, and I think we may have to accept that there's just a portion of the internet that just never accepts, never deploys some of these things, and this is just life, right? We don't. The internet is a big, wild place. The fact that we could get everybody aligned, or get the majority of networks aligned along, with one idea, or that's number of years, that's an achievement. But as Mingwei said a minute ago, a lot of these events, at least specifically origination leaks, get localized, and that's the system working. So somebody messes up, it gets contained. We can't completely eliminate people from messing up. That's going to be with us for the rest of our lives. But if we can just work together so that those don't affect other parts of the internet, then that's we've achieved success at that point.
So, Mingwei, since you are one of the guys who actually, commit a lot into BGP, what would you recommend for the companies to actually maintain their network clean from misconfigurations and all that stuff? Because we noticed actually last year it was a big misconfiguration by one of the Spanish telco, and I think Doug, you reported about that. How can we prevent
Yeah.
that from happening?
Do you want to take this, Mingwei?
Go ahead. I think he
All right.
wrote that blog post.
I'll be brief and you can jump in. Yeah, so I think you're talking about the Orange España incident from last year. This is a case where this bad actor discovered the login credentials for the RIPE NCC account for this the second largest mobile operator in Spain. Logged in, tried to decide what kind of havoc they could. It's kind of internet vandalism what was going on here, and cleverly enough, they figured out that the best way to mess with things was to publish ROAs that are, in variance with how Orange España announced their routes, causing many of them to become invalid. I look at it as, again, kind of a glass half full thing, because there's a lot of debate over how much networks reject invalids. I've been arguing that we're on that side of the equation, we're doing well as well. In this case, if we didn't have networks rejecting invalids, this wouldn't have been an outage, but we do. So, the outage is a sign of health, maybe, but, there was obviously a weakness there. There wasn't at the time two-factor authentication for RIPE NCC. IRN had already had two-factor authentication. RIPE fixed that policy within like a day, or maybe within 2 days. They had globally required everyone to do two-factor authentication, and RIPE admin is not a sufficient password for access for a major mobile operator.
Definitely not.
Yeah, so I mean, it's one of those things where that particular mechanism isn't gonna probably happen again. Is there another, mistake that exists out there? I mean, one could look at this and say, all right, well, our RPK ROV, this was, this is like the first time we saw it used as a mechanism for a denial of service attack. By causing these routes to be rejected and they lost reachability to the internet. But I don't blame the system any more than had someone gotten into your core router and just started mashing at keys and causing an outage. Like, that's not the router's fault. You shouldn't have been able to allow this kind of access. All right, well, the same thing is true here. That doesn't, in my opinion, impugn RV. It worked as advertised, just there are authentication. There was an authentication failure there. So, Mingwei, do you have any comments you want to add on that?
Yeah. So, Vincent, you mentioned about like how companies or organizations can get started if they haven't done so. I think one of the easiest way to actually get started is to go through the current practice from the major RRs like REP or ARIN. Like for now, I think new registrations, they'll require or maybe by default ROA registration. So if you go through that, and then you automatically get covered by ROA side, whenever you make announcements, you get your ASN numbers and prefixes associated on RPKI, and that's a very important step. And I think a lot of the kind of the non-ROA or the prefixes that are not covered by ROAs are the ones that are considered like legacy networks. They have been operating for a very long time, and they need efforts to kind of register their prefixes on there. But for newer organizations where the newer prefix registrations, they can go through that. It's a very simple step, and then it just ultimately got covered for the registration part for RPKI. And in terms of actually getting those validation, I think for smaller networks, they kind of get that for free by their providers many times, where it just if your provider doing a ROV, then you just get covered by that. And then along the way, anyone along the way that does that, especially as we mentioned, the tier ones that are the major providers out there, not provider, the tier one transits out there, and then they can basically cover like most of the like long distance transits. It's already done that. So I think to get started, I guess the most important part is to go through the kind of the prefix providers to get registration up there. And I also worked with like providers like IPXO, where you guys are doing a lot of RPKI stuff. So for example, your customers.
We do indeed, yes.
Yeah, we'll get that as well. And I think this is a very important step, just to get your prefix and as an associate and registered onto RPKI.
So all what you're saying is really a basic stuff. Set up the two-factor authentication, register the RPKI and things like that. But I would like to back up a little and actually talk about non-RPKI space and the hijacks, what is happening, So perhaps, Sebastian, you can outline a bit, how much of the IP hijacks you see, and how it involves the higher kind of scale of the abuse cases happening.
Yeah, and this is sort of of interesting because we are analyzing things in the opposite way. We go from domains to IP reputations, ASNs, and then BGP. So in general, as you were talking, like applying the best practices enhance the score of confidence on things that we are seeing. So it has like different type of analysis. But the non-RPKI space, we have seen consistently, for instance, scams in terms of crypto wallets and things like that. So they were using this space like small operators that are not in this space and that are easier to hijack. If you are going to do a crypto scam and route things on BGP, you are not going to Cloudflare, you are not going to a tier one, you are going to a small provider that you can handle in a different way. So there is a strong correlation of certain targeted scams, like for instance, the crypto related scams into wallet address and things like that, and the non-RPKI space. This is in general. But for instance, on phishing, we are not seeing a trend on non or RPKI space because we have seen even cases in big cloud providers of phishing kits deployed, and phishing is all about speed and trying to scam as much as possible in a short period of time. And these more sophisticated ones, like deviating routes from crypto wallets or things like that, we are always seeing that the non-RPKI is the space that they move into.
Mm-hmm. So can you confirm that it could be most likely the hijacked IP space?
Yeah, at least on the history that we have from the domain space to the attack, we are seeing this like a solid trend.
See, we got an answer. Implement RPKI.
Yeah, but for instance, and I'm going to a more simpler exercise. You know how many WordPress kits are around the world without the proper patching and things? So sometimes
Tell us.
I know we are talking about smaller industry that is highly focused and they need to keep up to date, but in general, applying the best practices is obvious, but not as widespread as we should expect. So it's like counterintuitive, but it happens like that. I don't know if you are seeing like a certain friction for certain specific reasons or something on the network operators, but sometimes it's like the answers are out there. It's just applying them, but this is not happening.
I may add something to that. For I mentioned earlier that we have kind of maybe two categories. We've got innocent mistakes that take place. I mean, we had one earlier today. There was a routing leak, and we can talk about that if we want to. But and then there's also the we call the determined adversary, someone who's intentionally trying to do something bad and defeat these mechanisms. And so ROV is an example. As much as I am a proponent of it, it also doesn't guarantee safety. And we've seen there's been a string of attacks on cryptocurrency services, and RPKI ROV was in play on one of these as a service that was hosted out of AWS, had ROAs, and nonetheless, the attacker was able to defeat this by forging, an AS path that would create their to render their route valid. So I think that's a good example of explaining, like, what are the things that we have yet to do. In that case, impersonating an AS is something that will defeat ROV and is essentially unsolved at this moment. We don't have the discussion is around some kind of BGP sec thing where you would cryptographically ensure the thing that's sending you is who they say they are. That is not a field of technology. We don't even have a consensus on exactly how we would do that. I think it's more of a conceptual thing at the moment. But that's I think these attacks. We want to be careful and not overstate. What the value is here. ROV is really best for trying to limit the impact of a mistaken innocent mistake that resulted in an origin hijack. It does make it slightly more complicated for a determined adversary. Like in the case of the Cellar Bridge from a couple of years ago, they did have to take another step, and that might have revealed or put at risk the caper they're trying to pull off. But I look at that as where the minds that are thinking about what we need to do next are now spending more time thinking about. We're not worrying, we're not wasting time looking at fat finger mistakes. Those are we've done a good job there, and now we can shift over to the harder problems, and that's where we stand today.
What I actually noticed talking with quite large telcos and other network operators, that in most of the cases they have a pretty limited resource, and sometimes the security comes as the last bullet points in their to-do list. And to put it simply, sometimes the network kind of unautomated network is not making them easier to actually look for the security issues that may have. But at the same time, what would be your kind of advice on for the lean teams within the networks? What would be your advice on getting the networks in a good shape from the security perspectives? Mingbe, perhaps you can.
Yeah, so in those cases, I think having a general overview of like the routing security posture should technically be a straightforward approach, but there are not many services out there that's just providing kind of that information like freely available. So it's not ads, but I work at the Cloudflare Radar, and we're trying to basically build these tools for everyone to just go and visit your own, for example, your own ASNs and see how many of your real as well prefixes are RPKI original or ROAs, how many of them are kind of having like security issues, and those are things that I think or those tools like this, like for example, previously we had like BGP Mong or those services that are available for people to view relevant hijacks or given prefixes and stuff, and now they're, I think, hidden behind other services. And so I would say like the services like that kind of monitoring security postures in general will give a pretty good hint on, and like in general, how well prepared a network is in terms of securing against like origin hijacks or things that are relevant to RPK world. But one of the segue that I want to mention, like also echoing on Doug's point before, was that the many of the issues that we see are no longer like hijacks or origin hijacks. They are like past relevant like announcements, like for example, malicious or like malicious attackers could just manipulate the AS path and then keep the origin as the correct origin, and then try to hijack the traffic by announcing a different path and then route through traffic to itself. And this kind of an approach announcements is not covered by RPK ROV for now, and there's efforts that pushing toward safety for AS paths, and we call it ASPath, things like that, and that should hopefully get to a RFC and get deployed. Then we can start securing the paths as well, so we don't get to allow like anybody to announce different paths and then potentially redirect traffic. Even for localized kind of conditions, they could also make damages. Like for example, those cryptographic like crypto wallets attacks, like localized attacks could also make a big dent in terms of like how much impact they can cause. And then we've learned, like through recent research, there are kind of approaches for the attackers to make announcements that are hidden below the radar of many of the public collectors, because and many of the services that are kind of using public collectors to detect issues, and they can be avoided theoretically. So those are also things that kind of a note that we should take into consideration for like a more secure like routing security posture.
Thanks. So talking about the abuse, because like phishing attacks and other related abuse types. Sebastian, what do you see from like if we will not pay attention to, let's say, the hijacks, what other things we should bear in mind on addressing the network health issues? And for example, again, the same question, what the lean network team can address as a low-hanging fruit for their network to mitigate or even perhaps eliminate those type of abuse cases from their network. You're muted, Sebastian.
Sorry. This is an interesting and complex question. The first and most straight way is have as much threat intel from specialists as possible in order to filter traffic. But in terms of how can you measure this traffic, is first of all, sometimes you are seeing routes having prefixes that are not in the same area. So you can create like a small set of rules in order to see if the traffic is behaving in a weird way or are consistent. We have seen first prefixes on zones that are not matching. Also, like there are companies that have like pretty static routing segments, and sometimes they are changing suddenly. So this triggers, for instance, alerts for us in order to say, hey, this is unusual, or also the fast movement in terms of routing to a malicious infrastructure back and forth in order to point traffic to malicious sites. So basically, anomaly detection is like the most obvious thing. Sometimes consistent to the type of traffic that you're having, and you're seeing inconsistencies there, these should trigger alarms. But there are like a lot of great threat interfaces that you can rely on in order to not to do this analysis on your team that is already small, but to delegate this to someone else, and then at a cost-efficient base for a small operation, that sort of makes sense.
Right. And like, what would be your advice on the same topic? Because I think that quite a lot of guys from our audiences is here, for the answer, or at least a hint.
Sure. I guess it, I mean, it also depends where you are in the food chain of, tier ones are going to have something different to do than somebody lower on. We do spend a lot of time talking about and analyzing RPI, ROV, but I think I would mention that there are a variety of other tools out there that are in use and benefiting us presently. So there's things like peer lock, where we try to make sure AS traffic does not pass. Or routes do not pass, more than 3 or more than 2 ASs in the TFC. That shouldn't happen. That was widely deployed, and I think that's another mechanism that's just serving us well. It's a very simple concept. And then there's a lot of IRR-based filtering as well. So we mentioned ASPA, which is just kind of in its infancy right now. Ought to catch some portion of path level mistakes, but people use IRR filtering to understand like what are the routes that they should accept through the kind of whitelist or allow list, the routes that are coming up through a customer. The one thing I've been spending some time with lately is just looking at the state of affairs with AS sets, which is one of the mechanisms people use for automating the creation of these router configurations to do, and they're kind of a necessary mechanism for a lot of people, for a lot of networks. Unfortunately, a lot of them are pretty terrible. They're in pretty terrible shape. So there's a few things. This is an AS set. It's kind of an old, compared to where we are with ROV, which is like, anywhere you are on the internet, the truth is the same. That's why it's a great thing that researchers like me and Mingwei love to look at, because like there's a lot less ambiguity here. IRR, like these AS sets, you could have a different set of rules for different, for an IX. For this IX is different AS set than this other AX, and you're getting transfer from this other location. And there's another, as a researcher, you don't know what list someone's using or how they're constructing it. It's it gets a little complicated. I think it's complicated as well for the service provider. But these AS sets, there are many that include more ASs that are globally routed. Like they've whitelisted essentially the entire global routing table. And if a network were to automatically suck this in and add it to a routing configuration, it's quite expensive. It's expensive to pull this data in. These things are updated with some regularity. If you were to actually expand this out to a routing configuration and put it in your router, it's just a huge waste, a computational waste, and then you're also defeating the whole purpose. So that's something that if there's a listener out there on this call and you've built an AS set, can you take a look at it? Because if it expands to like 1 million or more lines, you're causing problems for you're kind of polluting the whole system, and there are many of these out there. One problem people have, an AS set can be recursive, so it can include another AS set in it, which also may include. I think that's where a lot of the visibility for the people who are creating these breaks down, where you add another AS set as a member of your AS set, and you haven't maybe spent the time to figure out what actually that entails, or and so then these things explode, and then it's in some cases it causes more harm than good. So that's one thing, a public service announcement I might make on this in this discussion, that if people have an AS set that's in use, these things are still providing necessary it's a necessary part of routing hygiene. It's not. It's going to do things that ROV, is not going to do. The ROV doesn't know what are the proper routes that a customer should be sending up through. That you need another mechanism that provides that. And we've used IR filtering. We will probably continue to use IR filtering for a long time. But the state of AS sets is another thing that could be addressed today.
And probably one of the things that also some of the guys that even use in their PKI, they don't pay attention to more specifics. That is also a big issue we see sometimes, where you can actually have the ROA on like /16, but a smaller one on /19. And sometimes, it clashes with the whole logic at some
We
point.
had an incident just 2 weeks ago with North Korea joining the club of countries with deploying ROV, or creating ROAs. Let's just say that. I don't know what else they're
There
doing.
you go.
We'll
Even
probably
in
never
North
know.
Korea.
If North Korea can do it, you can do it, right? But
Absolutely.
it didn't go without a hitch, where they deployed. They published a ROA for the entire allocation of the 4/24s that they have. The max prefix length was whatever /22 or something, and they announced it as /24s. This created this rendered the 4 routes that their 1AS originates as invalid, and they lost reachability. Maybe I don't know how many people on this call were truly affected by that. For people who kind of study it, it's an interesting, development. They did go back and basically publish 4 ROAs for each of the /24s, making the routes valid again, or valid for the first time. This was their path, so it was not without a kind of a bumpy ride. People could maybe learn from that and not have to go through the outage that they experienced, and just be mindful of that max prefix length field either needs to match how you're routing it, or you could create these routes invalid. It's also not widely understood that is an optional field, and you can also just leave that out, and you're just going to require ROV to match on the origin. That would have saved them the outage if they were have done that. And I don't know, I'm sure Mingwei sees this too. If you spend a lot of time in the data, you come across a lot of persistently invalid routes due to ROA misconfigurations. And I think a lot of those are max prefix length settings, where I'm guessing at some point in the past, it probably made sense. It matched how they're routing it. Then they changed the routing, and I don't know. I guess most of the routes, or there's a covering route. I don't know how they don't notice that now a lot of their routes are invalid. But we see this where there's providers out there that are announcing a lot of invalid routes just because they haven't changed the max prefix length field. So there's a little, it's an education component to that.
Hygiene.
Yeah,
Hygiene.
we'll throw that into the hygiene bucket.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There are roughly 10,000 routes out there on the global routing tables that are just consistently invalid, and no one seems to care about those routes.
Yeah, sometimes I write to these
this
people. Sometimes we'll reach out, or I've got salespeople that are in conversations. So I was like, hey, next time you talk to these guys, just let them know, they just got to fix this one thing. And
But look, guys, what about some sort of I promised that I'm actually gonna raise this question about the frameworks, and actually, Paulus Judickas from his actually question is about the same thing. So, what if we, for example, I will read his question in a bit, but my question kind of lays down to what if we should create some sort of I don't know, extension framework or whatever you call it, to somehow expire those routes automatically? And what actually Paulus is asking, with so many stakeholders involved, ISPs, RIs, IXPs, security vendors, what's the most effective model you've seen or wished exists for country industry collaboration on BGP and abuse mitigation? So that's probably, comes down to the same question, should we have some sort of, framework where we could kind of, have, that hygiene bucket, as Doug said previously. What do you think, Mingwei?
This kind of remind me of like a success story of Peer and DB, where it's around a different topics, on a different direction, but it's very successful in terms of like kind of a collaborating and contributing data, like their own data, into one platform, and also allowing people to distribute to, considering updating and then kind of providing important information regarding peering to each other. So it feels like a similar platform like that provides, like, I don't know, BGP or routing hygiene related information, and providing a way to communicate without kind of searching through a list of abuse emails and send it manually over there, or something like that would be incredibly useful and then helpful in terms of like, I don't know, getting researchers involved and then getting more insights from, or I don't know, collaborating on kind of insights and then calling from insights from everywhere else. That would be incredibly useful. For now, I don't think there's such a model exists. It's just for like BGP and abuse. Maybe Doug or Sebastian knows more about that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of informal say trust groups that exists, but it's very ad hoc. I don't I guess the one thing we know about these some of the cryptographic attacks due to that employ BGP as part of the attack, due to a particular threat intel individual who's phenomenal, who tracked these things down and made these associations, and I worry that when we talk about this bucket of determined adversaries, that there's other incidents. These things can be really hard to find if you don't have a lot of interdisciplinary skill set to be able to track these things down. I worry there's more incidents like that, like those out there, that we just that was a little bit by luck that the person working at the one company was targeted, and that made it this is a guy you don't want to cross because he's going to keep following you to the end of the earth. But that was lucky for us that guy was on it, because now we have to learn what took place there. Had they not gone after his company, we might not know about some of these things. And there may be other cases out there. There probably are. It stands to reason that there's other determined adversary scenarios where someone's hijacking something, and it's just so opaque. There's so much gray area in BGP weirdness that it's you can't just look at BGP alone and find a smoking gun. So I worry about that. If someone knows of other confirmed bad actor incidents, determined adversary, please make those public, or at least find someone who's in one of these trust groups, because it's invaluable for us to use these as cases to motivate the security community to do more, and to understand how we're going to protect, because I feel like there's an area that's just not well addressed.
Mm. Thanks, Doug. Sebastian, Mingwei touched the abuse emails. That's like a very great area about the things, because, like, if we talk about the domain who is, you rely only on the registrar kind of contacts. And what I actually noticed, that in most of the cases, when you actually forward some sort of the abuse reports to the domain registrar, it's like, going to a black hole. You don't expect anything. You don't expect anything.
It's
So what would be your recommendation, or are there any like frameworks for the domain names that already exist there?
something that we have been successful at doing is, because we manage takedowns from the domain standpoint, but this is related to IPs a lot of the time. But what we are doing is reports. On the other side of the abuse email, you have a team that is overwhelmed with 150 things, and they also need to reply into this. So the easier you make the work for the analyst that is receiving the email, the better and the faster. Because on one end, maybe some of them are unresponsive because they don't care, but most of them are unresponsive because they have plenty of other priorities, and this is something that they need to comply with. So, for instance, we were testing a lot of scenarios. It's like, okay, we are saying this domain is going to be malicious. And in our case, it's going to be sometimes the phishing kit is not there, but because we are measuring the infrastructure and how everything was deploying, we have history backwards. So we try to consolidate everything into one pager that is like a no-brainer for an analyst in order to understand and do the takedown, for instance. So for me, the most important consideration is like on the other side, you have someone that what you're sending is priority 110 of the day. So the simpler and clear that you're putting all of the proof collection that you have, you make his job easier and it gets faster. And also something that is happening to us is that over time you are building relationship with them. And sometimes if they trust you enough and you put the information in a solid report that can back up their actions, you start having like a flow, and also sometimes addressing certain pain points that they are having. Because, for instance, if you are having, I will put an example most on my end, but if you're having a malicious domain that is used for a scam, it is highly likely that it has been bugged with a fake credit card or a stolen credit card, that eventually it will get rejected. And for registrars that are like a high volume, low margin, that is this is damaging their profits a lot. So we are helping them preventing certain things before they have an economic downturn. So sometimes it's like on this game is like the simpler information and more story that you gave in the short period of attention span that they will have, the better. And also is trying to understand what is there for them in order to collaborate. So which are the pain points that they will achieve over time. And for instance, with Register that we are totally unresponsive, over the period of 1 year, we were chasing them, and eventually they were not only more responsive to our abuse information that we were sending, but also implementing together detection mechanisms in order to preempt damage.
That's quite interesting. That's quite interesting. So, coming back a little bit to the incidents, we got a question from a Brima Joe. Although it largely holds that most original hijacks might be misconfiguration issues, the outcome could sometimes lead to many disruptions, as seen with the recent Cloudflare incident in June. So my question is, how can the internet community handle this challenge? That is quite a challenging question, or
So
not?
just to clarify this, this is, do you think this is referring to the June 2019 incident, or is there another, Mingwei, is there another one since then that I'm not aware of?
I don't know. I don't think so.
I would just mention that in that, if this is the June 2019 incident, that actually wasn't an origination hijack. That was a path hijack. Now, at the time, Cloudflare, made a stink, let's say, that had Verizon at the time been rejecting invalids, it would have saved them. But it's not because of the origin. It was because of the max prefix length. So there was a route optimizer involved. Route optimizer fabricates locally more specifics as a mechanism how it does its traffic engineering. And then the problem with these things is that if they leak out the internet, those are more specifics that are not not normally used in the global routing table. They therefore kind of take over because there's nothing to contend with, so they win. Now, Cloudflare, I don't know if they still do this. Maybe you can comment. At the time, the max prefix length settings on the ROAs match the routes, and that made it so that when the more specifics came out through this leak from the route optimizer, they would have been invalid and they should have been rejected, but not because of the origin. The origins were intact. It was just the max prefix length was the problem. I don't know. It's a little bit of a common misconception that I clear up from time to time, but I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway, do you have any?
Mhm.
I'm not really answering the question. I'm just making a clarification about the incident.
Perhaps
Yeah,
it wasn't
I
that
don't know
big
enough.
of.
Sorry, I don't know enough about that instance to comment on that.
If
Okay.
you notice, guys, we actually jumped on questions because it's quite broad questions where it needs a broad answers.
Yeah,
So
so I guess so. I with
mm,
the clarification I said aside, you know,
mm,
this individual's question is how can the internet community handle this challenge? And I guess I would refer back to my opening remarks that I think we're doing a pretty good job by improving routing hygiene. We haven't had another incident like this again. That was a path leak. We certainly haven't had a large origination leak. You know, knock on wood, this doesn't happen, you know, as soon as we get off this call today. But I have a sense, you know, it's hard to know exactly how everyone, the state of everyone's route filtering. I can't sit here and know, but just there are leaks happening almost every day, and they aren't affecting anyone. And that's success. And it's hard to tell that story as a storyteller. It's hard to tell that story because these are all the things that didn't happen today. And so I'd say that, you know, how does the community handle the challenge? The community, you know, which people like Mingwei and I, who are analysts in this space, who try to dig into these incidents, figure out what are the lessons learned, what should people do. We speak at conferences, and I think that has been a message that's been received, and we've made a lot of progress. I think there's a lot of credit that goes to a lot of the engineers that work at a variety of companies that have read the stuff that we've written up to figure out what were the problems that caused these outages, and we're not having those particular cases anymore. We're on to the next round, and that list will probably never end of what's the next thing to do. But go
you
ahead.
know, we haven't had a chance to touch IPv6, which is like the most favorite topic of for all of the NetOps. And actually, Edwinas from LinkedIn, who is one of the attendees to the webinar, asked a few questions. IPv6, not fully related, but what are your thoughts? Is /48 enough for small business to start adopting IPv6? Have you detected any IPv6 hijacks? How are you dealing with IPv6 abuse? So it's like in one question, there are multiple questions, basically. Who wants to start covering this? Sebastian, perhaps you
On
want to take on the
yeah,
IPv6 abuse.
yeah, on the IPv6 hijacks, they are less common for sure, but historically the trend. So as the adoption is more widespread, we see more attacks. We have monitoring IPv6 since the early days, and even if it is a small amount share of abuse being, what we are seeing is that is growing consistently. So something that the good thing is that we are taking care now, but it will be a more core element through time. Regarding the first part of the question, it really depends, I think, on flexibility. Sometimes /56 is enough, but it depends on the flexibility that you want in terms of subnetting there.
Mingbi, perhaps you can comment a little about IPv6.
Yeah, so in terms of hijacks, yeah, we do notice less kind of or misconfigurations for IPv6 prefixes, but maybe just simply because it's not, I don't know, as commonly used as before at this point yet. But I don't see any difference in terms of handling IPv6 hijacks or leaks than IPv4. They are essentially just another types of IP blocks that are larger. Well, in terms of like BGP, like hijacks handling, they are the same essentially for the systems. Yeah, and then for the first question, the /48, I think it's more about like how many point of presence the business has, right? For /48 is enough to cover entire IPv4 space. It's definitely enough if you're just counting the address space. But if you want more point of presence, like across the globe, like POPs or different buildings, and then you want each building to have a like prefix to basically and do kind of a globally routing and distributions of traffic, then that may not be enough. But if you're just coming from one city, one point, I think it's more than enough for most cases. But yeah.
I'll just add one comment on the V6. So, when we looked at like RV metrics, adoption metrics, V6 has always been farther ahead, and I think that's just a virtue of there's less legacy stuff because it's a generally newer protocol. People who have deployed V6 that came long after V4, and so one thing that's held ROV back in some cases is that they've got old equipment or old something or other, or they came before Aaron or the existence of the RIRs. There's some kind of complication. Those issues just don't exist in the V6 world, and so I think that gives them a little leg up on deploying some of the newer mechanisms. Can I mention? So Abrima clarified what incident he was talking about in the comments, and so he was referring to there was a hijack of 1.1.1, so the public 1.1.1.1, the public DNS operator for or service, public DNS for the Cloudflare operates. Mingwei can mention this, but I guess he wrote the blog, so but like that is a address space that as soon as they went with that, you knew there was going to be some problems because this was address space people were using as for either internal numbering or like there's textbooks that has this as even though this is a valid global address space. For many years, people have been learning that this is something to play with, and so as soon as Cloudflare went with trying to deploy that as a public DNS service, I think they'll always be dealing with some amount of noise as a result of the legacy of that address space. But Mingwei, do you want to comment?
Yeah, it's been infuriating topics among many of our internal folks that are it just keeps happening, and seeing those reference materials that are quoting quad 1 or 1.1.1.0/24 and all of our places used as examples, which is and there are RFCs that are like for you to use specific blocks for that, but and those cases are like naturally will invite misconfigurations that just causing issues. It's been a while since I read on that the blog post, so I don't have much comments in time to respond. Maybe if we get a chance next round, I can be more specific on what my understanding on that instance.
Sounds good. Guys, our webinar is coming to an end, but I really want to kind of get from you, on those closing remarks, the ultimate advice for the network operators. What would be your ultimate advice, Doug?
Create ROAs, reject invalids. This is for your benefit as well as others. If you have an AS set, make sure it doesn't, it's parsimonious. We want just the minimum amount on there. Otherwise, you're polluting the whole system and kind of messing up other people's IRR-based filtering. But otherwise, keep going, and let's not lose the momentum.
Doug. This is how we met.
I worry a little bit that we could be a victim of our own success, that we are kind of removing the possibility of these massive incidents that catch everybody's attention. Those are good in the respect that it helps motivate people to deploy things. If we can, maybe we've gotten rid of some of that, and so it's going to be more challenging for those of us who are kind of evangelists in this space to try to keep pushing forward, because I worry we could be a victim of our own success and not solve these other problems that need solving.
Exactly. Sebastian.
Well, I think that collaboration is the key, and the sooner we share information between us, the faster to fix things. And this is something that, as I raised, we are seeing scammers collaborate faster than us. So this is something that we need to get better and find a way to contribute all together in the findings.
Indeed.
Yeah, I agree that collaboration is very important in these days. We have many of the systems out there that are doing detections, but there's hardly any way to confirm, validate those detection results. And then the more information we can gather, we can collaborate on, the more accurate those detection systems are. And most of them like can be even open source systems or free services. With more information from like those networks or everybody, then we can get accurate like detection results for leaks, for misconfigurations, for hijacks and stuff. So that will benefit everyone. So just contribute data however we can. That will be extremely useful for everybody.
So all in all, I would say that actually it's not that bad as it seems from the first sight, right? RPKI is adopting. What we probably are missing a bit is more collaborational type of tools or framework. Then, things about the abuse contacts and probably, more transparency on the who is data would be a thing to kind of benefit the whole community. And of course, probably the hygiene of your network is one of those important things that you have to pay attention to. So thank you very much, guys, for today's webinar. And thanks a lot again for accepting my invite to join. And just before we go, I would like to introduce our next webinar that we are going to have in 13th of May. And we're gonna talk about pretty provocative topic, are IPs truly yours? Exploring the limits of IP address ownership. So it's gonna be an awesome topic together with very well-known guys from the industry. Thanks a lot, guys. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.